Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its governor and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. Japan has therefore undertaken a surprise offensive extending throughout the Pacific area. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. The people of the United States have already formed their opinions and well understand the implications to the very life and safety of our nation. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
But fate decreed that victory would be neither quick nor easy. The Japanese spread over the Western Pacific, making it their private preserve. Within a few months, they realized their dream of empire. Except for the dogged resistance of isolated American forces in the Philippines, enemy success was complete. On April 9, 1942, outnumbered American soldiers surrendered on Bataan. The infamous death march that followed was a milestone in the history of man's inhumanity to man. On May 6, the beleaguered garrison on Corregidor capitulated, leaving the enemy supreme between Hawaii and Australia. General Hama, who ordered the death march, accepted the American surrender from General Jonathan Wainwright. Wainwright wrote just before his capture, "We did our best. Although beaten, we are unashamed." Before the ink was dry on the surrender documents, General Douglas MacArthur promised, "I shall return." In Australia, he prepared his men for the long road back. The Australian countryside was transformed by the temporary quarters of the growing army, as men and supplies were massed for the operations to come. Meanwhile, we struck wherever and however we could. Although the attack on Pearl Harbor crippled our Pacific fleet, our carriers had escaped. While the enemy still savored their early victories, a daring group of Army flyers under Colonel James Doolittle left the deck of the carrier Hornet on April 18, 1942, for a surprise raid on Tokyo. Many did not return, but their courageous actions served notice on the enemy of what was to come. May 1942, in the Coral Sea, our Navy successfully blocked the Japanese invasion of Port Moresby and helped prepare the way for a decisive American success at Midway. There, Army, Navy, and Marine flyers would be among the first to distinguish themselves in the Pacific fighting. frontier of the Pacific, called for Admiral Nimitz to press westward from Pearl Harbor, while General MacArthur's forces drove north and northwest from Australia. But first, the enemy had to be stopped in New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. Allied troops waged a bitter delaying action during the first phase of the Papuan campaign in eastern New Guinea. They fought for time and a chance to build up reinforcements and supplies behind their tenuous jungle lines. A cruel climate spread fever in the ranks and turned every routine task into a nightmare. But the Allies held Port Moresby. Fresh troops poured in from Australia and the United States. Men of the 32nd and 41st Infantry Divisions, debarking at the port, faced one of the most arduous and critical campaigns of the early war. To speed the counterattack against the enemy, who had advanced to within 30 miles of Port Moresby, MacArthur flew troops over the rugged Owen Stanley Mountains to the fighting near Boona. Friendly, cooperative Papuan tribesmen made a large contribution to the campaign's success. Not only were they willing workmen, they also saved many American lives while serving as guides and scouts. While the Papuan campaign continued, an amphibious thrust got underway in the Solomon Islands. The enemy had begun construction of an airfield on Guadalcanal, from which planes would soon be able to attack our communications and supply lines across the South Pacific. Our mission was to take this field and the island. Initial enemy resistance on Guadalcanal was so light that landing forces quickly established a beachhead and prepared for advance through heavy jungle. The invasion force was confident after such an easy assault, and few expected the churning hell of enemy fire that was to come. Nor did any guess that it would require 6 months to subdue the island. In New Guinea, during the fall of 1942, tropical diseases and the rigors of jungle took their toll. Entangled vines and shadowy growth, the Japanese waited, willing to sacrifice their lives rather than surrender. By January 1943, the enemy had expended 8,000 men in a futile effort to hold the area. Then Boona fell, and the threat to Port Moresby was ended. The enemy tried desperately to reinforce his troops in the face of constant air attack. Defenses in the South and Southwest Pacific was the base at Rabaul on the northeastern tip of New Britain. American strategy called for the isolation of Rabaul. New Georgia in the Solomons was the scene of the first major campaign in this operation. In eastern New Guinea, U.S. Army paratroopers dropped at Nadzab to seize an airstrip deep in enemy-held territory. From Nadzab, Australian troops moved on to Lae. The Bougainville landings in the Solomons provided needed air bases for protection against enemy air attacks and gave us another air base along the road to Rabaul. Again, we advanced through a green wall of jungle that masked a stubborn enemy. As Allied forces continued to fight and win, the myth of Japanese military superiority began to collapse. The enemy was tough, but he could be beaten. The war in the Pacific presented problems previously unknown to American fighting men. Small islands spread over a vast ocean. Objectives often identifiable only on a combat map. The feeling of isolation and the constant oppressive jungle, a formidable enemy itself. The Army Air Forces developed new supply methods to meet the requirements of isolated jungle troops. Airdrops of food and ammunition often sustained American units until the enemy was driven back or destroyed. Airstrips were torn out of the unfriendly forest in record time. Fighter planes would be based on these fields less than 225 miles from Rabaul to escort our bombers on airstrikes over enemy objectives. The drive north gained momentum until our troops were ready for the assault on New Britain, the last step in the isolation of Rabaul. Rest and recuperation camps were scarce. During their preparation for the New Britain invasion, units in New Guinea found relaxation wherever and whenever they could. Religious services were held for those who wished to attend. Landing craft that went in at Cape Gloucester found no beaches. The familiar jungle grew to the water's edge, abundant with swamps and tangled ridges. The smell of rotting vegetation carried far offshore. B-25s helped soften the landing area. The troops called Cape Gloucester the southwest corner of hell. Cavalry units that stormed the Arawe sector as infantry found themselves harassed by mud and mosquitoes as well as a hidden enemy. Western New Britain in American hands, the Admiralty Islands of Los Negros and Manus became primary targets for our advance because of their airfields and harbor. The 1st Cavalry Division had the job of seizing them.